Hello, everybody, and welcome to Pardon Your French podcast. New episode with myself, Stephanie Lauren.
And I'm Vanessa Shernock.
And we welcome Carol Curtis to the podcast. Hi, Carol, how are you?
Hello, how are you both? Very well.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, great.
Well, Carol, how did we meet? Well, this is the first time we've met actually on Zoom, so kind of in person. So basically, to let everybody know, I saw a post that Carol put into one of the property for sale Facebook groups, and I was like, oh. And your post stood out to me because you had so much personality and charismatic kind of traits in it. I was like, wow, that is such a refresh for an estate agent, because I was one for 12 years in England before I moved out here.
Oh, really? Right.
Yeah, and it's like we're all kind of cut from the same cloth. And then I came across your post and I was like, oh, she's got a different vibe, which turned my head, which I really, really enjoyed. So that's when I reached out to you and just said, would you be interested in coming on the podcast? And here you are.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you very much for that anyway, because as you say, it's particularly in France, lots of adverts. Obviously, there's lots of properties for sale and lots available, but they are pretty bog standard adverts, really. So in any role, you have to stand out somewhere. So, and that's just me. That's just the way that I am, and that's the way that I do business, and it's worked for me all this time. So
whereabouts in England were you from before you moved out here, Carol?
Give us a little rundown.
I'm a Yorkshire lass, born and bred in Leeds, but lived just outside York before we moved to France, and did pretty much the same as here, really. Renovated a property, lived there all my life. I'm actually Irish. My parents are Irish, but I lived in the UK all my life. One of 7 girls.
Yeah,
you can imagine. So, and that was it. Working really, really hard in the UK. Wanted another child. Didn't see the possibility of it in the UK just because of childcare costs, etc., etc. The rat race. And we had a little bit of money aside and said, let's go see. And it was sort of a 2-year project. So within 2 years, we'd moved out lock, stock and barrel to France. And I was pregnant with my second child. So, my second child is, officially French, shall we say. And never looked back since. And that's 19 years. So I moved to Brittany, which again, lots of Brits do, because obviously the connections with the UK, etc., etc., and obviously the property prices as well are very, very reasonable, and you get so much for your money. Not that far from the coast, so everything was within an hour's drive, so just perfect for family coming over. As lots of Brits do. My story moving here is not exceptional. It's not different to most other people's. And lived there literally until 4 weeks ago, and now live in the Var. So for people that are not familiar with that, it's the Côte d'Azur, and an hour from Nice and about an hour from Marseille. So in the Aix-en-Provence sort of triangle, if you like, but literally on the coast. So it couldn't be anything more different to what the life was like in Brittany. For all different reasons, but huge advocate of Brittany and France in general. It's just, there are just so many beautiful places to live, and it's so diverse and so different. If you want mountains, if you want sea, if you want countryside, if you want busy, you want city, it's literally got everything.
Yeah. So then what led you into estate agency?
Yeah, I mean, I when my son went to school, I did the whole Felicity Kendall thing. I had the wellies. I did the vegetable plot. I did the whole thing. Tried everything. We did, successfully. We raised sheep and we ate them. We had chickens. Did we have ducks? Can't remember. We had some noisy ones. Can't remember what they're called. What they called with long necks. Geese. There you go.
Yeah, they're vicious. They are vicious.
Yeah. Goats. Dogs, cats, everything. And that side of it was amazing. But there was definitely something missing. So when my kids went to school, I just thought, I need to do something. I was 33, was I? 33, 34 at the time. So still young. And I went to Pôle emploi. So for English people, that's basically the employment services. I'd heard really, really bad stories that, they're quite negative. And if your language skills are not great, bear in mind, I didn't really speak French. I spoke pidgin French and whatever. And a very young lad that I'd still love to thank to this day. French just asked me what my background was. I was a regional manager in the UK for Laura Ashley for forever. So I had loads of retail experience, but didn't speak French. He literally frog marched me out to this beautiful shop over the road, Maison de Monde it was called, so in interiors. And in my pidgin,
I know it.
yeah. And she was ripped my hand off because she wanted to go on holiday and she couldn't because she had nobody to look after the shop. I asked every time she spoke to me, I just went, vous pouvez répéter, s'il vous plaît? And I got the job. And then literally 3 days, she went on holiday and left me on my own in a shop with all these people coming in and asking me for things that I had no idea what they were talking about. But literally, it was probably one of the scariest times of my life because I just felt completely out of my depth. But I did it and I stuck at it. And then one of my friends who worked for Leggett Estate Agencies, who I work for, who are an international estate agency for the last 24 years, it's, the owners of Leggett are English. She'd asked me a number of times and I said, I'm happy, I'm fine. And then the final straw for me, I was working in a shop and retail in France, it's long hours. It was 9 o'clock till 7 o'clock on an evening. I had 2 children at the time. But I was happy, it was a nice job. I had a great team. Everything was brilliant. And my mum got diagnosed with cancer and my mother-in-law at the same time. And I just asked for some time off. And she was really not very nice about it. So the next day I just thought, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
So I just handed my notice in and I literally started with Leggett, went on my training and I sold my first house within a week of starting with Leggett.
Oh.
Apparently it's unusual. I don't know if I'm a gobshite. Really? Can I say that? You might have to beat that out.
You could say that, carry on.
I love it. I love talking to people. I love just interacting, just finding out what they want, what their needs are, and I just generally feel I've found what I'm meant to do. I found what I'm meant to do.
Yeah, I think estate agency, you have to be a self-serving kind of love the public and want to help somebody else kind of live their dream kind of character. It's not just about like the fee, the fee that you get and things like that, because obviously estate agencies get a lot, more fees out here than they would in England. But there's so much work that goes into selling a property in France, I feel, compared to England.
Just the time scale as well.
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, I bought my house 4 years ago. When did you buy your home?
Similar time. I mean, we've owned it and lived in it for a long time, but divorces and making sure that. But that whole process of going through buying a house, going through the notaires, and having all the different diagnostics that are done and everything like that. So we'll talk to you a little bit about that, and hopefully we can inform would-be buyers about some of the risks, some of the issues that might come up when you're trying to buy a property.
Yeah.
France.
Yeah, because obviously so many people, English and, everywhere around the world, have a dream of buying a property in France. So obviously we've had Brexit and things. So can foreigners buy a property in France?
So yeah, anyone officially can buy a property in France. And obviously it depends what that property is for. Is it a permanent residence or is it a holiday home? And obviously since Brexit, there are now rules and regulations in terms of having a second home. And obviously you couldn't stay there for more than 3 months. But obviously you can request a visa, etc. Which again, I'm not going to go into massive detail about that because again, that's another podcast on its own. But we help with all that. We can put you in the right direction. We can tell you where to do, what forms to. And we don't physically do that, but again, an add-on to what we can do is we will provide all that information for you. And then obviously if you do buy a permanent home, then now if you are no longer in the European Union, you will need to apply for a visa. I can send links about where you can find out more information about that particular procedure. But, to answer your question bluntly, yes, anybody can buy a house in France. There's no limitations.
What areas would you say are probably the most popular with different foreign groups. So like Brits, they really like a certain area. Americans like a certain area. Are there popular?
Well, where you are is very popular with the Brits, as you probably know. Provence, Charente, Dordogne, um, mostly expats, English, not just, we've got German, we've got, all different nationalities throughout France, but they're predominantly the areas. But then in terms of Côte d'Azur, the Americans absolutely love Nice, they love Cannes, they love Saint-Tropez. And I find it a little bit of a shame sometimes because when I was in Brittany and I would show people properties, as soon as I showed them Jocelyn, they were literally like, oh, this is where I want to be. I'm like, well, you can't because there isn't any houses to say, oh, we haven't got something in your budget. However, there are some really, really lovely towns. And then they got really set on, this is where I want to be. There is so much to explore. And same with, not just Americans, but particularly Americans. The last statistics, 1 in 2 purchases in Nice are American clients, which is phenomenal.
Wow.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
But there's not just Nice. I don't know if you've ever been, but it's beautiful. But yeah, when you look at the statistics, it's Provence and Charles, Dordogne, Brittany, and Côte d'Azur. I think they're probably the top 5.
And then property sales in France go through a system with the notaire. So what's a notaire or notary? In the US, we have a notary, but you use a notary to verify legal signatures and things like that. But in France, it's a little bit different. Tell us a little bit about what the notaire does.
So a notaire, obviously, you cannot physically purchase a property without obviously passing through the notaire, because he does all his due diligence. So whether you buy a property privately, through an agency, online, at auction, or on another forum, that's absolutely fine. You can do that. But the final act of sale or the closing in America would have to be through a notaire. And that's where he would literally background into the vendor to make sure that the house was available to sell. It's not got any mortgage outstanding on it, or they've not promised the property to anybody else. And then from the buyer's perspective, if it's a loan, to make sure that the loan's been agreed. If there isn't a loan, obviously they're in a position to buy a property. And, they look into, have they had any court judgments, anything. They will literally look into the background to make sure that it's a sure sale, and further down the line, there's not going to be any issues. He will also talk through, the diagnostics, which will have already been discussed, because obviously there's two forks of a sale. You've got the compromise of sale, which is, the preliminary agreement of buying a property. And then the final act of sale, which is when you would be in front of the notaire. Obviously, he charges for his services. It does depend where you are in France. Obviously, Paris and the huge cities do charge more, but in the rural areas, it's just gone up. It was 7%. And it's gone up to about 7.5% now. So unfortunately, there is, a little bit more to pay. And that not usually, that is always paid by the purchaser. So
and
whoever
that
buys
at the point of sale?
At the closing. So
the
fees will be transferred, including obviously the price of the property, and anything else outstanding. So tax foncière, which or any taxes due will be sent directly to the notaire and paid pro rata. And then literally on the day, the funds will be transferred to the buyer and the vendor, sorry. And the buyer obviously will pay any outstanding charges, including obviously the notaire fees. And obviously if they have passed through an estate agency, the estate agent fees will be paid as well.
Yeah, because I think when I was looking at property in England, during the whole COVID thing, I was like, yeah, we'll move to France and this is our budget and blah, blah, blah. And then I got here, found this house and then went, yeah, I'll buy it for this price. And then all the paperwork started coming through and I was like, sorry, what now? And I hadn't really budgeted for about another 30 something thousand euros of fees. So obviously that was my complete naivety. So, a podcast like this, just to make you aware, you can have your budget for your property, but then make sure that you put those fees on top.
I never calculate the notaire fees because I'm not a notaire, but I do send them a link to a website where you can just put in the price of the property and it will do you a quick calculation. So you've got an idea of exactly how much it's going to cost. Just be aware that when you do make an offer on a property, and it moves forward to the first stage of signing. So the compromis de vente, the estate agent or the notaire will ask for proof of funds, and the proof of funds will need to cover everything. So it'll need to cover not just the purchase price, the estate agent fees, and the notaire fees, which is usually where people come unstuck. So it needs to cover the whole purchase.
And then you, as an estate agent, you never do a verification of funds before you start showing people properties, or do you do that?
Yes and no. We like to think that people are honest, and if they're viewing properties, then they are in a position to move forward. However, again, I said I've got so many stories to tell you. I've had clients that have offered, and the proof of funds are never incoming. We ask for proof of funds pretty much very quickly if an offer's been made, and we wouldn't hold the property until we had that proof of funds. But it's happened very, very rarely, but it has happened occasionally where people just on holiday and they fancy having a look at a few houses and they make a few offers and then nothing happens. But, usually I find generally people are pretty honest, but we wouldn't move forward to any contract and any intention to buy, which is sort of almost the precursor to a compromise, to say that the house is now blocked for you. The agreement's been made between until we had proof of funds, whatever that may look like. It could be mortgage, it could be cash, it could be a compromise of sale from a house that they're selling, whether it's the UK or elsewhere. As long as we have something, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, that's what I did. Just proof that.
Just wonder, because you do imagine the number of people who come out here on holiday, look in the shop window and go, "Oh, let's go look at some properties," and it's like they don't
Time wasters. Yeah,
time waste.
Tire kickers, as we call them.
Tire kickers. Yeah, no matter what industry you're in, you'll find those time wasters.
Yes.
Then, so you said there's 2 stages in the buying process: the compromis and the acte de vente. So, about how long does that whole process take?
You're looking around 3 months. It can be slightly less depending on. So you visit a property, you make an offer, we send out an intention to buy, which is basically just a document to that the price has been agreed between vendor and buyer. It's signed by both parties. There's a lead date on that and an end date. So once that date has passed, the house is no longer fixed or blocked for that particular person. It just gives our contract department the time to put everything together and get the contract ready. Then we move to compromise. In today's society, thanks to COVID, pretty much everything is electronic. So regardless of where you live, where you are, you don't need to be present. You don't need to go either to the notaire or to an office. We don't need to present the company in person. But obviously we do video calls with English to go through the contract in person. Legally, we have to do that, and I would never get them to sign a contract without knowing that they absolutely understand. You then have a 10-day cooling off period, and that is your right as a buyer to pull out at any point. It happens, and that's absolutely fine. It's their legal right to do that. Within that 10-day period, you will be asked to pay a deposit. It can be anything up to 10%. Again, it's a discussion that can be had, because they might not have that 10% ready at that moment in time. And obviously I would have a conversation with the vendor to check that they were okay with that amount, whatever that might be. We generally ask for 10%. That's held directly at the notaire and transferred directly to the notaire. And then from that process, the notaire will receive all that documentation, is where they begin to do their due diligence, etc. And you're usually 2 months after compromise signing, you're ready to sign the final agreement.
Wow. Do you get because obviously I've heard about the French property people offering full asking price for a property because there's lots of people that are interested in it, and then they've had to back out and they've been fined.
Usually it's very, very rare. I've been in the business a long time. It's very rare after the 10 days that people pull out. Very, very rare, because they've had that time to reflect. They've had the time up to the compromise to think about it. They've had the 10 days. We would always have visited a second time wherever possible. I would almost insist that we have a second visit, because you don't see things on the first visit. It's the wow factor. And wow. And then the second visit is very, very technical, look at everything. So they're sure of the purchase, but they can pull out. If after the 10 days, if there's no clause, because there can be a clause suspensive in the agreement, and that could be because the person buying is selling their house, so it's a chain. we obviously cannot let somebody buy a house if their house has fallen through, because they're not going to have the funds to do that. So that will be a clause suspensive. If the house falls through, they have no obligation to buy, and they won't pay any penalties. If it's a mortgage, and if at the final hurdle the mortgage falls through, they won't have a penalty. So we protect the buyer, and it's all very transparent and very open saying. But ultimately, if there's no clauses, if it's a cash purchase, you pay your deposit and then you pull out, that deposit legally will go to the vendor.
Yeah, because it's such a, they have plans their end, and it's, they're financially penalised, got to find a new buyer. So it can completely make sense, and it actually covers both parties. I think it's a really fair, and obviously you can dictate what, as a buyer, what clauses go into. Can you stipulate when I want this property, this is what I want to pay, but I want these clauses in?
Yeah. And it's a conversation, ultimately where there is a moderator between vendor and buyer, and we will advise both parties. But if it's a clause that's, not nonsensical and it's too extravagant, then, the vendor can say, no, I'm not going to accept that clause.
Okay. Yeah.
And it could be, there's so many, and it just depends on the conversation between the vendor and the buyer. And obviously our conversations with both of them, it's not exhaustive. There can be anything. And it's just whether or not it's classed as reasonable, or ultimately it's whether the vendor accepts. The vendor accepts that we're just there to advise.
Can foreigners get mortgages in France? Is it?
Yeah, and absolutely. It's just again about, usually we would ask for things like.
Oh, I'm surprised at that. I didn't think.
Yeah, we work with a few mortgage lenders who are specialised in dealing with overseas expats, etc., etc. They would normally ask for some sort of deposit. Again, I'm not a mortgage lender, I'm not a professional, but obviously we will put you in touch with people. If somebody comes to us and says, I really want to buy a property, but I will need some sort of mortgage, we'll send them and put them in contact with our preferred partner, if you like, that deals specifically, and they speak English, so it's obviously easy communication between the person that's wishing to buy, etc. So yeah, absolutely. I can't say to be accepted. It's all down to personal circumstances and obviously their financial background. But yes, absolutely.
Amazing. So off the back of that, I guess you'd need a French bank account.
Well, yeah. Weirdly enough, I sort of rethought about it, because yes and no. Because obviously when you do buy a house as well, you need to set up services. So you need to set up electric, water, which again, we do all that for you. But I had a recent sale with an American lady, fabulous lady, and we were struggling to get an appointment at the bank because obviously, as you know, in France, we have lots of bank holidays. Yippee!
Yeah.
And she then set up with, it wasn't Revolut, I think it was Wise. As long as you have an IBAN, then you can do that. But ideally, if obviously you live there permanently, you would set up a bank account as well. A little bit more complicated now that we're not in the EU anymore. They just ask for more information and your fiscal residence, etc., etc. But again, we will provide a list of what you need, and wherever possible, we would go to the bank with them as well. And if there's nobody at the bank that speaks English, we would go with them as just as part of the service, really.
Yeah, and I think, do you know what? Somebody being obviously English in England trying to buy a French property, when you've got your estate agent that does hold your hand and guides you through the process, and actually is shining a light on things that you need to do, that you have to prep for, is amazing. When you can calm somebody and say, look, this is the process, this is what everybody goes through, this is not scary, it's going to be fine.
Mining muscles.
Yeah, ready. Yeah, one hand was a lot thicker than the other one. But again, from that's changed, because when we bought our first house here many longer than 19 years ago. That was it. You had the compromise, which was this big. Then you had the final signing. There's none of that anymore because everything's electronic. So when you go to the notaire, even now, hallelujah, it's just an electronic signature on the pad.
Oh, what? That's very,
yeah, I had to pay her.
No, all changed. Yeah. Mostly thanks. We can thank COVID for anything. It was that.
Well, as far as financially, what kind of property taxes, running costs, things like that, are you going to end up encountering once you have purchased your property in France?
So obviously, depending on whether it's a permanent home or a second home, let's talk. If it's permanent home, you'll just have the taxe foncière, which is land tax. Whether it's land or it's an actual building, a property, etc. Whether it's lived in, it's not renovated, you will pay a taxe foncière, and that's based on the size of the property and the land. And that's for French, English, Espanol, American, everybody pays. It's a legal requirement. It's an annual payment, but you can pay monthly if you wish to. And it can vary. I've just put a fabulous property up for sale for 2.5 million, and the tax is €4,000 a year. I paid 1,200. You could be in rural France and it'll be, €200-300. It really depends. If it's a second home, you will pay tax habitation. Excuse me, sorry. And that's obviously on the property itself. If it's rented out, then it would be the person renting the property that would pay that, but ultimately it's the owner that would pay if it's a holiday home. And again, it's an annual payment. It's roughly the same as the taxe foncière. The tax habitation years ago, I can't remember the actual year it was eradicated. I think the last town to pay tax habitation was 2023. If you're a permanent owner, you no longer pay it. Yippee!
Yeah, I think, that was new.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this actually, because initially it was originally just being eliminated for households that earned under a certain amount.
Yeah.
Now it's everyone? Every person?
Yeah, it's pretty much everyone, yeah. However, they are talking potentially about bringing it back. But the French, they love a good protest. A protest, that's it. Grève and grève. So who knows? Let's hope that it doesn't, because obviously it's a massive bonus for people that obviously own their own home, etc. But obviously, if you own a second home, then you will definitely pay the two taxes. You can have the waste tax as well, but it's usually included in your tax foncière, but not in all towns. So again, we would know that on a visit if it's individual bins, if it's communal, if it's included in the tax, just to let them know. It's not really expensive, but again, it's just to be aware that there is potential tax. I've sold a lot of houses recently in Brittany to Americans. Absolutely love working with them, by the way. Absolutely.
Americans love France.
And the thing is, they expect they expect a brilliant service.
Yes.
But they are brilliant to work for.
Okay, no, we could talk more about that. So if I was an American, for example, how would I find a property in France?
Well, obviously, there's lots and lots of different sites. So if you want to go on, look on your own and select properties and then get in touch with the agent yourself, you absolutely can. Or we provide a service. If you choose the properties, we will then map an itinerary for you, because again, it's all good looking at a property online, but we know France is huge, and you could be traveling 300 kilometers to go see one, another 200 kilometers to see another one. So we really, really say, pick the properties, send them to us, we'll deal with it, we'll suggest more, we'll do your itinerary, we'll get in touch with the agents. We would recommend to go through an agent because of the language, because of obviously the pitfalls, because of the issues, everything. But you don't have to. You can find a property online and you can get in touch with the vendor yourself. There's lots of sites that obviously it's all private sales, etc. Or the notaires or sell properties, not very well, but they sell properties. So yeah, there's lots of different sites. You can just tap in, have an area in mind, tap it in and you'll get loads. There's loads. And then obviously in France, there's loads of sites as well. But if you tap in, Green Acres, there's BIC, there's signed a partnership with Hamptons. There's absolutely hundreds and hundreds of sites. Right Home, who we are partners with, that will, you can look on there for any property from 50,000 to, millions of pounds. So yeah, it's easy. It's not complicated. Anybody probably knows where to look. But if you want help and reassurance and guarantee that your visit's going to be fruitful, and you probably need to contact an agent and work through with an agent in France, you can list your property with as many agents as you like.
Yeah.
But not only is it confusing, but it's tiring to obviously try and get in touch and book appointments for each individual agent. So I always say, let me know which properties there are. I'll get in touch with that agent. If they're happy to work with me and happy for me to obviously come and do visits with you and with my client, it will just make it so much easier for that client. They've come specifically, they've travelled a long way to visit let me do the legwork for you. So that works usually really well, particularly for American clients who are used to that kind of service.
Does that mean that a house could be listed? So say that we were talking about the fees and everything. So say the buyer has a price that they want for their property. Does that mean that if it's listed with several different agencies, that the price could be different at all those agencies
Yeah,
on their
it,
fees?
yeah, it can be. We try and avoid it because it just doesn't look very professional. But obviously, an agency fee can go from 2% up to 10%. 2%, again, I'm not going to get into details of it. You can pretty much guarantee that the service is going to be pretty much non-existent. They're just listing a property, end of. But if that's all you want and you can manage the rest yourself, then that's fine. And then up to the 10%, which is probably the top end of the market and more to where we're geared towards, it's because we offer a full service. It's not just turnkey show property, it's everything. If, for example, I contact, an agency to say, can we work together? We would obviously then either, if they've only got the listing, we would just work to their fees, or if it's my listing, we would work to my fees. But wherever a property is advertised with multiple agencies, I will try to match their fees just because it looks much more clear on the website if we are all at exactly the same price.
And is that negotiable as well? So if somebody does come to you, likes a property, the fees are 10%, and is it negotiable then with you?
Yeah.
To a certain degree?
To be perfectly transparent, yes. And it really depends on the market, the property, the length of time the house has been on the market, how flexible the vendor is in terms of obviously the negotiation. It really depends. Yes is the basic quick answer.
So it's, that personal element to having an agent, and I would have paid her tenfold for how she's worth her weight in gold,
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's not just, about giving advice about a state agency. If somebody's moving from a different country, whether it's with or without family or, whatever, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. Apart from death and marriage, it's one of the biggest stressful situations in your life. Not marriage, divorce even, or maybe both. Yeah. And that's what it is. It's so important. You will always get somebody afterwards saying, oh, my boiler's broke down. Do you know anybody? Or, I need a new floor. And we will only recommend somebody that we've either personally used ourselves or somebody else has recommended them that, we've seen the work, we've seen the finish, we know exactly what they're offering. And it doesn't stop there. Like you say, I've got friends now for life that I met through either selling or buying a property that will become friends just, because of that. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's after service, it's before, it's after, and, it continues, for as long as they need, really.
Amazing. The fact that you can give personal, I've lived here and this is what I like to do. There's these facilities and think that personal recommendation everybody loves, because when you've never lived in a country and you've just selected an area generally because of the house, you also have to take into consideration like schools, bus, transport, restaurants. Are you an outdoor, love to go, or do you like to go hiking, or do you like to just be at home? Are you a homebody? There's so many things that you need to consider.
And that's it. That's so key because, most people have done a little bit of homework before they buy, but not everybody. And again, that's about any estate agent asking the right questions. You're moving here, why?
So when obviously I bought my house, there was lots of things included, like some furniture that obviously didn't get taken to the déchetterie. That was here, gifted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously in England, you know what's included, and you would assume that your light fittings and your oven and things like that are included in your purchase. But yeah, your white goods and things like that. But here, everything's kind of
Again, it's a conversation. It's a transparency. It's having that conversation early on. Even at a mandate stage, when I go to list a property, I will ask the question. So anything that's included in the property will be listed in the compromise. So it's a contractual binding agreement.
when you are buying in France, there's diagnostics, right? The surveys that are done on properties, and what kind of information is provided on a survey like that?
So obviously, in difference to the UK, I'm not quite sure how it works in America. We don't do building surveys. They're available, and we again can ask somebody to come and do a building survey, which is becoming more and more common, which I'll come on to that in a second. But a legal obligation is for every vendor before a sale, before the house goes onto the market, to have a diagnostic check. So that would include electricity, parasite, which is anything to do with obviously wood, be it on the floor, on the ceiling, in the walls, etc., and obviously under the roof. Then you have amiant, which is asbestos, and then finally, so obviously, then you've got lead, which weirdly enough they don't check for lead piping. It's just paint. So anything else you've got shutters, external shutters, which are ancient, they'll find that it's got 25 coats of paint, and the first coat of paint that was done back in the 70s has got lead on it. Obviously, the other diagnostic would be the drainage. And obviously, in France, as will be the case for you, I'm assuming, that you have a fosse septique.
Yeah. Yeah, we did our last podcast was on that.
All right. So I don't need to go into it, but obviously, that's another diagnostic that has to be done.
No.
It doesn't have to be done to put a house on the sale, but before you go to compromise, you would have to have that report so that everybody knows that whether it doesn't or doesn't conform. So yeah, that is a podcast on its own, I agree.
Yeah, we literally did one, and it's been very popular, actually, surprisingly. But I thought the diagnostics were very thorough. When I got mine, I was terrified because it was like that thick, and I was like, oh my God, what is all this? Okay, so are there any inheritance rules that I need to be aware of?
So again, I'm not an inheritance tax specialist, etc. But obviously, what we would always advise clients. So if you're buying as a married couple, if a partner passes away and they have children, whether they're children, shared children or separate children, the person that's passed, half of their inheritance will go to the survivor, and then the rest will go to the children. We split amongst however many children they are, whether their own, whether it's her child, his child, or whatever, it will be split amongst the children. So we would always recommend anybody buying a property to put in a taunting clause, which basically means that if a partner passes away, the property will automatically go to the survivor. And then when they pass away, then the inheritance, obviously in France, you can't disinherit your children. You cannot say,
when I moved here, yeah.
So you have to. You can't disinherit the children. So just be careful. But again, if the notaire's doing a proper job, and obviously an estate agent as well, we would just ask those questions and say, okay, you are married. Sometimes the notaire will say you're not married. I would recommend that you get taxed at least, which is like a civil partnership effectively here, which also protects them a little bit more. But that's something that I would definitely do because it can be very strict. And I've heard some people that have bought with me and then their partners, passed away, and they've been in a real state because it wasn't sorted, or they were like, yeah, no, it's fine, we're all good, and then they basically lost the house because the children had taken the house from them. So just cover yourself.
Major thing to consider, because as English, we can write whoever we want in or out of our will.
Exactly.
We're thinking about it. So that is a major thing to consider. And you can't predict the future, but you just have to cover all bases and worst case scenarios, I think, when you're buying a property.
Do you ever experience a case where the children have inherited a property from the parents who've passed away? They are liable for inheritance tax immediately, not when they sell it, but literally as soon as they inherit that property. Is that how it works here? Where you
well, it depends. If they want to sell it, if they have decided they want to sell it, then you've got up to a year. So inheritance, you've got up to a year to deal with it. So if somebody passes away, you've got 12 months to deal with the whole inheritance. So obviously by that time, the children need to make a decision on what they want to do with the property, and they will have a year. However, if that house doesn't sell, they will still have to pay the interest, which could be a massive issue because obviously if it's 30, 40, 50, who knows, depending on the price of the house, they may not have that money.
And then do you know how the value of that property is decided is it from the previous sale, or do you and other estate agents then go out and value the property so that they can decide what the property tax or what the inheritance tax will be on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The notaire will ask for 2 evaluations. Usually, if you've got a good notaire and you've had, if he's dealing with the inheritance, he may well go out himself and value it, and then he'll ask it, or anybody can ask another agent to go, and that would be a formal document sent to the notaire, and then they would decide the price between, obviously, whether it's, if there's a fourchette, if there's say it's 150 and 170, they'd say, let's say 160, etc. And then obviously the capital gains will be decided, the inheritance tax will be based on that. But obviously, ultimately, they'd only pay it on what the house was sold for in the end.
Amazing.
But if they chose not to sell, they would have to pay whatever it was valued at by the notaire.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, we talk about it all the time on the podcast, basically, the language barrier thing. And it's like there are so many resources out there. You can find plenty of people who are willing to teach you French. You can find plenty of people who are willing to be your translator for French. Like, this is it. It's an entire economy for expats out here. It's not an impossible situation. Like you say, make the effort, but also in a situation like buying a house, or we were talking about doing fosses or whatever, it's like there's a whole different jargon associated with these activities. So don't be embarrassed that even if you speak French, you can't buy a house. Like, that is a whole extra level of legalese. When you're reading the acte de vente, you're like, yeah, okay, I understand the words, but there's like, it say, it's like the same reason you'd want a lawyer involved in your divorce, or a lawyer involved in your house purchase in the UK or in the US. Like, you need that level of understanding of what's actually going on beyond just knowing the words. It's a important part of getting help in these situations is important also.
Yeah, that's it. And don't be frightened to ask for it. We do get lots of people that say, oh, no, it's fine, I can speak French. I'm like, yeah, but this is different. It's like medical jargon. Exactly. Isn't it? Medical jargon. You say, oh, yeah, I understand. Yeah, but I don't know what that means. And it's because you're not in the medical industry. And that's exactly what we are here for. And what I've said to lots of people, even on Facebook, when they just ask questions, I'm like, send me a message. I'm happy to answer your question. I've been here for a long time. I'm an estate agent. I'm not asking for a fee. I don't want you to pay me. I'm just happy to help you to move forward, to make that decision to move to France or whatever you want to do.
And it's just nice to have a safe, trusted place where you can ask the questions and get the relevant answer. So thank you so much for your time and shining a light on buying a property in France as a foreigner.
Loved it.
Thank you so much. And thank you, our viewers, for watching this episode of Pardon Your French podcast, or listening to it if you're on one of our many streaming
platforms. There's a few.
If you are enjoying watching Pardon Your French podcast, please like and subscribe. Follow us. We're on all the social medias and all of the streaming apps, streaming platforms, and YouTube. So keep watching.
Thank you so much.
Take
care. Bye.